So, a few people, more than a few people here, are career changers or starting out at the full sense. So dovetailing off of what you were saying, like, how do you get started? What advice? Actually, the three of you, like, what advice? What do you wish you had known when you got started, and what would you like to impart to new people? Especially, and there are two different types of who are doing it for the first time and professionals who are sort of expanding it.
Well, for the career changes, what we tell our students is don't quit your day job for the first couple of years. Dovetail, because it takes a while to build a career. So sometimes it happens overnight, but not always. So be prepared, and don't despair. Don't expect it to happen quickly. It's just the nature of the beast. Then also look at all the options. Particularly this is particularly apt, I think, for the younger people who come out to the master's programs and for whom this will be the first career. There are some full-time opportunities, there are some freelance opportunities, there are a range of choices. So you need to consider everything and see what suits your lifestyle and what exactly you want to do. Consider learning, mastering a second language, developing one or two additional language pairs. Remember, you don't have to be fluent to speak the language fluently. You only need to read it. You need excellent reading comprehension in order to add to your translation pairs. And it always helps. So start thinking about your future path in the profession.
Of course. In regards to your student, can adding an additional language hurt or help with your translation with your current language? Because sometimes maybe adding another language, a new language that is, maybe you might use the situation with the other languages, in my opinion. Or can
use it in your brain or in the profession?
Pretty much. My brain.
What do you mean by confused? Well, you won't have to speak it. This is reading comprehension. I personally don't see how it can confuse. It can only help. I think a lot of people here are in that situation.
I don't usually hear that. I usually hear that if you have a lot of languages, it can actually backfire on you because people think that you're not really serious about any particular language pair, and like also learning a new language seems like such a long endeavor to embark on. I wonder. I mean, you've obviously looked into this, but this is just something that's new to me.
Well, oh really? Well, we have several renowned translators who teach in our program who have added languages to their portfolio, and it served them very well. And you don't start with Spanish and add Korean. Sorry, are you Korean? Yes.
So maybe Portuguese, Chinese,
you usually build around the languages you know. So if you start with Spanish or French, you add another Romance language. You go around that. But for example, this is perhaps deep waters, but in some language pairs, like Spanish and French, there's a huge amount of work. There's legal, there's financial, there's so much. So it's possible to specialize. In other language pairs, like Bulgarian, for example, you can't specialize. If you want, you can't even perhaps have a full career as a Bulgarian translator, but you have to be prepared to do everything. So if you're with Spanish or French, you can become a legal or a financial translator. And then you can add French or Italian and continue to be a legal translator because you know the civil code versus common law quite well. And you continue to go deeper into European versus American law quite well. And I can cite examples of prominent New York Circle members who do that. And you continue along that path, but pursue the legal path, let's say. While if you're with the other example is if you're with a language like Bulgarian or Greek or something like that, the advantage of having one or two other language pairs is that that's where the money will come from. You can't make money with Bulgarian language. So you need, let's say, Russian perhaps, which is again closer, Bulgarian, Russian, very, very easy. And it's good to add a perhaps Western European language where there's more work. So you can have a nice little package.
Can I add something to
Sorry,
that?
yes.
No, but the important thing also is to say that you work into your native language. That
Yes,
means when you
yeah.
add a language,
Yeah,
you're not
right,
adding
right.
that as an active
Absolutely,
language
yeah,
that you translate
yeah.
into, but as she said before, it's reading comprehension. So
Right.
if you're doing French, German, Italian, and you're adding Spanish, Spanish is going to be very familiar to you because you already have Italian and French, so it may be easier for you to pick up. But again, it's a passive language, it's not your active language. And you're translating from that language into, let's say, English. So that,
And also you don't
Just a
learn
different context.
about, spending years and years. You don't spend years and years because you learn the grammar, the vocabulary is very similar, the legal language is very similar. So it's reading comprehension. You're not going to write letters in that language, you're not going to speak it. This is very, very targeted.
So I think going with your potential for confusion, the potential confusion would be your clients. Them thinking, oh great, you go from Bulgarian into French. Even people who've worked with, have great experience in working with translators, they don't understand the directionality. And especially working from two languages into one, I get new clients who, and reminding, I'll have old clients come to me and say, oh, can you translate this into Italian? I'm like, nope, I can recommend, I can send you to a colleague of mine, but that's not a service I provide. So that directionality thing is just, it's something you just are constantly explaining to people.
I have a very, very quick comment, I promise.
No,
I have worked as an account manager, project manager at translation companies for 13 years. And I'm also a linguist. And what Milena was saying before about keeping your options open, like in-house positions, I firmly believe that somebody first starting out in the translation field should try to get a job as a project manager at a translation company. Because I know that it has helped me a lot. And just learning from both perspectives. I mean, I'm a linguist at heart, so I know the types of questions to ask clients because I know, difficulties in the other languages, but also I think it's very good in teaching linguists how to be more business people and how to, interact more and be more, professional and things like that. And I know that if I ever become a full-time freelance translator, my experience working at agencies will be invaluable. So.
it works both ways. Because I've learned the other way, that being a linguist has actually helped us, both of us, be very close to our clients and being in touch with them, and they appreciate that. The clients that we have appreciate that we're linguists and not just businesswomen, because it's an added dimension. Some people who run LSPs are not linguists, and that you can feel. In other words, we know what we're talking about. We were translators, and we still translate and proofread sometimes because, as she said, you want to stay in touch with your profession. And you have to. So I think it goes both ways, actually.
You have a question?
I just wanted to ask if what the market is like for Italian translators. I know there's a big market
What direction?
in Italian to English.
What the market is like?
It's not bad.
Is there a need? Is it a language that's in demand?
I just got a translation 5 minutes before we left today, right? 18,000 words, Italian into English, legal financial from one of our clients. It's contract work. It's boring, but it pays the bills.
I mean, some people like contracts.
But it's no.
Right.
For example, we get a lot of Italian work. We get cosmetics work. We get pharmaceutical work. I wouldn't say it's the language that we have the most work in, no, but it's definitely one of the languages. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Going back to the question of direction, I'm an interpreter, as you know, so I have to work both ways, of course. But when I got started doing translations, I was told that the absolute rule is that you only translate into your native language, even if you consider yourself completely bilingual. Is that, I mean, I keep getting asked, requests for translations into English, and occasionally I do some.
I would agree with that. We rarely choose translators who do not translate into their mother tongue. Very rarely. And there are exceptions.
Certain language pairs.
Well, not necessarily, but yeah. But I would say that is really still the rule, at least for us. I think that's your language where you're comfortable in and where you're an expert. The other language has to be strong, though. You said reading comprehension, right, when we add languages and things. I still believe that the source language has to be something that you have to continue to expand your knowledge in, because the more you know about the source language, the better you translate. It's no good not to understand what they're talking about and wanting to translate. You really need to know the source language as well. So.
Yeah, of course.
I saw questions in this area.
I'd like to add something to what Nicole is saying. Like Maria Galetta, I'm mostly an interpreter, but I'm also a translator, and I'm a native Italian speaker, so I mostly go into Italian. However, and I totally agree that you should go into your native language, but there have been situations in which the source text is heavily charged in terms of cultural references. And in those situations, you can either have a native speaker do a basic translation and then have a native speaker of the target language polish it. Or you can have the native speaker of the target translation do the translation, but then you need a very heavy editing on the part of a native speaker of the source language in order to make sure that those cultural references have been caught.
Exactly.
So that's one thing
I would agree with that.
Actually, to add something, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, just go ahead.
I think it's important for an interpreter or a translator to go back to the country where they're from. And I mean, if possible, at the very least, try to read newspapers online or something, because you have to keep the language evolved. And I've been occasionally worked with other interpreters who hadn't gone back to their country for a long time, and they were really rusty. I go back twice a year.
Sarah, did you have a question?
No, I was just thinking about the idea of what language to translate into, and the fact that, in my case, for example, I learned both at the same time, and I feel identified almost 50-50 with both, so it's hard for me to define what would be.
I think that, just quickly on that, like, same situation, and I was educated here. So my Spanish is fluent and all of that, but I translated to English for that reason. So, I mean, other factors, right? Where were you educated? When have you studied? All that kind of stuff.
But I think that's also a little bit the problem with too many languages, because I think we have to spend enough time just to keep up with the two that we are working with. And then you just spread yourself thin.
Just to pick up on this native language attrition. For those of us who have immigrated, and if we don't go back home frequently enough or don't read or speak it enough. I find myself sometimes at the difficulty for certain words, or I question my syntax or things like that, and I have to stop or leave the translation aside and read it over again afterwards to see if it sounds right, because there is native language attrition. It's a fact. There's lots of research on that. But there's another thing about translating into the native language, and of course that's the ideal situation. But over the last 10 years, as we know, since September 11th, there's been a huge interest, particularly on the part of government agencies, in recruiting and training translators in less commonly spoken and taught languages, and really less spoken, less commonly taught, like Persian, Arabic, you name it, Pashto, Urdu, Hindi, and so on. I don't know, I dabble in that, and I'm very interested in that, and talk to people who deal with those things. And the situation has improved somewhat, but not a lot. So, what is the situation? There are very few native speakers, native English speakers, who, because the translation is usually from those languages into English for translation and interpretation purposes. There are very few, or even if it's into those languages, the people still have to know English very well. There are very few native English speakers who can do the job. And even if those who are bilingual or have immigrated or have lived here, they have to be, ideally they have to be US citizens and so on. So the pool is really small. Among those, of course, the people who can do the job have to be very well educated, speak the language very well, very literate, etc. The pool is very small. So the government and a lot of government agencies have actually realized that they will not be able to meet their needs with native English speakers or bilingual immigrants who are very well educated and can do the job. And they have decided that they can actually build teams of native Urdu, Pashto, whatever speakers with native English speakers, and those Pashto speakers will translate into broken English, and the native English speakers will polish. And this is how the job is done in many areas. Now, the CIA probably has some ideal translators and so on, but they are over there. But there are many other areas where things need to be done that are not classified.
I'm sorry, Hunter. Leonard?
Yeah, in terms of translating into your native language, when I started translating, I mainly translated Dutch to English, and I translated legal subject matter. And my background in legal was in Dutch, so I found that because of that, I didn't necessarily have an equivalent in mind in English of what I was translating in Dutch. And in addition to that, what I found that what you encounter on the job isn't going to coincide with what you learn. So you end up dealing with documents that, although you know the subject matter generally, are completely new to you. So I wouldn't necessarily know all the equivalent type of document in English. So I just wondered what you had to say about that, in terms, because I'm actually what's happening in that process is that I'm becoming very familiar with all the subject matter in Dutch, but even though I'm an English speaker natively, I don't necessarily know the equivalent in English.
Right. Well, it goes into the same subject that was discussed before. Working with somebody who is proficient in it, in English, would help, obviously. So, as we said, teaming the two languages up is usually a very good thing. Working with somebody who can help you there, and you can furnish the expertise in the other language, and they can come to you and say, that's this in English, you can explain it to them, and So we do that quite often, actually.
Yeah, actually for translators, I think it may be a larger problem because you tend to work so solitary.
Right, right. And that's why I like when people pair up as proofreaders and translator teams, because they can help each other, especially when their backgrounds are a little mixed, or one has a strength over the other. That really works. I would suggest that actually to translators and proofreaders to find each other and work together that way. So.
How do you find each other?
Networking.
Two things, I guess. First of all, apropos of the South Asian languages, and I had this problem come up where I was serving grand jury duty. We had a defendant who was an Urdu speaker. I speak Hindi, but they're the same language except for the alphabet. And the interpreter was horrible. And I was faced with the dilemma. I had to tell the ADA that I cannot, I have to recuse myself, because if they insist on his version being the legal one, it wasn't reality. But I mean, my main languages are I'm bilingual in Spanish and English, and that's what I'm aiming to break into. But I happen to be a South Asian specialist doing also Hindi and Tibetan. But there's not a huge market for this, clearly. So clearly, Spanish will be. I mean, that Spanish will be my bread and butter with the occasional other.
Well, Hindi with a native English speaker, there may be a market because usually they don't translate well into it.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder. The question is, I wonder, because here's an interesting question. When you have a nation that has a colonial history, where many people claim proficiency in English. Well, no, it's Indian English, which is a whole other thing. For instance, forget about definite articles. But the point is, it's not clear to me what if there is any actual Hindi to English market. I'm wondering about it.
It's scattered. I mean, if you go to different agencies, I mean, I can speak, and literally just throw your resume out there, meet as much people. When people think, oh, I need Hindi to English, they'll think, that's just, no, it's a language of limited diffusion. I mean, that's, as a former project manager, that's what I did.
You would jump on that resume as a project manager.
And store it in your heart.
No, there aren't many. And the ones that you have, sometimes, their English is not that good. So if you have somebody who really speaks English, it's a good thing.
I firmly believe that there's so much material out there, especially if you're coming from another profession where you have a specialized background, you can find a niche. I mean, I think there is demand.
Well, my niche
it's a matter of finding
was scholarly. I'm an ethnomusicologist.
Right. So, for instance, I mean, that might end up being only a small fraction. I mean, you do a full-time translation, but you want to be creative about it. I think it is a matter of finding the right.
I saw a question right here.
Yes.
Please.
I actually, when I decided to come, I was hoping somebody would be in publishing. And I'm a writer, and my language is Portuguese-English, both Brazilian and continental. And I'm like her. I was raised with both, so I could not even tell you, which one is my native. But I have no idea how to even approach, I'm good with long, big projects, like books and things like that. And I've done that in Brazil. I don't even know what you would do in the States to work with a book. The translation of a book is there. I've Googled it, I've done everything, and there's no clear answers. Like, how do you approach, the author?
Clients?
Well, no, to translate material written in, for example, my case, Portuguese to English. Do you approach the author in Portugal or Brazil?
If you're generating the project, so normally, for instance, most of my work comes to me, the publisher has already decided they're going to publish this book.
Right, so how does it get to you? I wouldn't write it, I would translate it.
Personal network. I mean, cultivate, you can, I don't know many translators who have agents, but working with colleagues, I think you can can contact publishers,
Yeah?
but you want to look at specifically your language pair and there are so you would be talking about translating from Portuguese into English.
Yes.
Then you want to work with American publishers.
Yes.
There are certain publishers who are exclusively, and this is really growing in the publishing industry. They're really focusing on literature and translation, or they only do works in translation. So you definitely want to start with them. And then depending on the title that you're proposing, maybe you do want to go to Random House if it fits one of their imprints. So you need to be really educated about what text, if you're generating the project, what you would be proposing and who it would fit with. So it's there are many facets to it. In part, you need to be an agent, especially as a translator. If you're generating the project, you need to make the case for why it should be translated to English, and that there is a market for it. It's a lot of advocacy. You should also check out the PEN America website. They have a lot of resources for translators, a lot of residencies. There are a lot of prizes out there where if you're working on something and you want to send it in, that gets you recognition. Sometimes it gets you a bit of cash, which is nice, and it builds your network.
That's for specific languages.
PEN America. They're
PEN?
PEN.
Oh, PEN America. Okay.
Yeah, I think their website is pen.org, something like that. But if you Google PEN America, they're on Broadway, and they have a really great page of resources in terms of grants, publishers who focus on specific language pairs and things like that.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. If you don't have a book project in mind, but you'd like to be translating literature or literary nonfiction, is there a place to look for publishers who specialize in the language that you want to translate from? Right. You're saying pen. I'm sorry.
No. I will give you my card, and we have in our translation program. We have some courses in literary translation. We even had a course in literary for publication, which we don't have at the moment. But we can put you in touch with some of our instructors who can actually give you some advice.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions? Anybody else so far?
It's aligned with your question too. I translate German, English, and also tend to the creative side. I do a lot of marketing and advertising. I was an opera singer for 25 years. And I'm interested in, primarily, interested in doing things in the creative area. But I do not know how to go about getting into this market, specifically German.
So for me, it started out, I had a background in publishing, and that particular publisher did a lot of works focusing on Italian culture that either originated in English or coming from Italian into English. So for me, my personal case history is I made contacts with the editors there. So once I went freelance, I could stay in touch with them. And in terms of freelancing, almost all publishers have a pool. Almost no publishers have in-house translators anymore. They have a pool or a stable of translators that they call on. Certainly reach out directly to publishers. Cold calls hardly ever work, but if you're persistent, if you send material, and again,
So what kind of material? Simply resume or
resume, letter, if you have a specific project to propose. I mean, they usually want to see, they will consider a specific, if you want to send in a concrete, this is the title I'm proposing, here's a sample of the original and translation. Here's my case for why it would be something that would be ideal for your publishing house to release in English. But really you want to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening with that publisher, so that they'll, if you can speak to their strengths, if they only publish, say, fiction about sports, there are these weird, publishing is so huge that it has all these weird things that you just want to find the right one to reach out to.
Yes, Alta, did I understand from what you said that the market for translation books from other languages into English is growing, or?
Definitely growing. Yeah.
Because everybody knows that the publishing industry is having all kinds of problems.
Oh, it's in a complete crisis. Yeah. And but there's more demand for international literature now. There are more. I mean, they're tiny and they're young publishers, but they're very interested in translation. The University of Rochester has open letter books. They only do works in translation. Archipelago in Brooklyn. New Directions since forever. They're sort of one of the stalwart standbys. But you know, and I think so. There's increasing demand. The publishing industry is a dinosaur. It's been dying for decades. And you literally look back and you can find articles that say, "Oh, publishing is finally dead." You know, the profitability, certainly technology. It's a complete mess right now, but it's very exciting. In terms of ebooks, distribution, all of this is changing. So I would say I have had demand for my services is exponentially increasing. The pressure to, again, with literary translation, it does not pay anything like medical, legal, contractual. It just doesn't pay as well. So, and there's increasing, so the more demand for literary translation, they always lowball you. They will never want to pay a reasonable amount. So it's a matter of cultivating that relationship and educating your clients.
Hi everybody, my name is Simona Dini. I've been working as a translator for something like 6 years, and I've been mainly working on making the localization industry, and now I've been finding it very hard to specialize in other industries, medical, legal, and I'm eager to hear some advice as to how a newbie like me can convince a client or a translation agency to give me work, translation work, if I have no experience. How can I really start to gather experience in these fields? Yeah, in the field, I mean, how can I start, starting with no previous experience?
You have to first make yourself known.
Oh,
no. Make yourself known, meaning you have to get your information out there. That's the first step. Your resume has to go out there.
Contact. Just simply contact them?
Contact the translation agencies, let's say. For any new translator, I would say translation agencies are probably a very good place to start because they get a lot of work. Not all translation agencies get work in all languages, but you can ask those questions when you can make an initial call and find out who's responsible for that area, and they might give you information. We usually try to. Others may not, I don't know. And then follow up with the information. But also afterwards, you have to be insistent, as she said, you have to follow up. You have to do a lot of work there until they give you a try.
I'll also chip in, the ATA, our affiliate, the American Translators Association, has a mentorship program.
Yes.
And every year they have an open call. You can send in your material, and they literally will pair you up with someone else. I cannot speak highly enough of mentorship. Maria was my unofficial mentor. Really, because I was not trained as a translator. I was coming from this other industry. But I knew I'd always look to write. I had the basic building blocks. I didn't know how to put them together. And the mentorship, even just guidance of someone with more experience is invaluable. And that's where I think NYCT and ATA. But ATA does have this established program where it fast tracks because you're responsible to this person. It's a very one-on-one, intense working relationship. So that would be a great place to look.
And any group like this one, any network, like you said before, you have to build your career and to build your business. You have to network with people. You have to reach out. And there's a lot of groups also online. There's a lot of groups associated with the ATA. They have different language divisions, for example. So I think you could find a lot of tools out there.
This side of the room is really quiet. Anybody? No? You're there. Okay, please.
Just following up on what you said, if you contact an agency, one of the things that puzzles me a lot is that I think one of the questions that asked is, what is your price per word? I know you're not going to give amounts, but the idea of the price per word, not differentiating between the difficulty of a specific translation, it's just very weird to me.
And we will not ask that question because we don't work that way.
Oh.
So, you know, we realize that it does depend on the text that you work on, and it does depend on the turnaround. It does depend on the language. I mean, that's what she mentioned at the beginning. We do an awful lot of client education with regard to that. A lot of clients come in and say, what's your price per line, per word, per page, whatever? And I say, I'm sorry, we don't work like that. Please give us your text. We will look at it and we'll get back to you with a price. And we give per project prices.
Okay.
But we do pay most of our translators by the word because that's the industry standard, or our proofreaders, editors by the hour because that's standard as well. So yes, there is a certain rate, but I would say there is leeway, okay? And there's, you know, depending also on the volume, et cetera, et cetera. So there's always room for discussion, but I know that not most agencies don't work that way.
Just to add to the, plus a lot of agencies have their set prices and they will not, you know, if you say 15 cents a word, they say, well, forget it. 8. And then it's just a matter of, are you comfortable with that or are you not? And then the 18 mentorship, I did that. I loved it. I also did the NYU certificate in translation. I had a great mentor there too, so I love that too. And to go to a new agency offered to do a test translation. And if they love you,
right,
come back to you.
Offering test translation is actually a very good way of introducing yourself. It doesn't have to be huge. Don't expect pages and pages because that's not useful and nobody's going to take the time to read it. But a paragraph, for example, that's very useful.
Could you clarify that? By offering a test paragraph, meaning where you offer them a sample of your work, the original and your translation?
Yes.
Or they will give you one.
Or they will give you one. There are agencies who will give you one, yes. Sometimes we do that when we have a client who asks us to do a test translation. We do it with our translators. But we rarely tell them, you know, do a test translation for us. We usually ask for samples that you have done.